Hello again. It is still Saturday the 17th of September and it is the second one of tonight, just to keep myself ahead of the game. So this was a donation from Charlie Cavai, ex-whisky shop employee and acquaintance of mine on Facebook. Thank you very much, Charlie, for this plastic bottle of VAT 69. But this isn't an official miniature, because I think what he's done, if you can see, he's actually, I think he's photocopied the label or printed it off from somewhere. So a bottle of VAT 69, a bottle of VAT 69 even, would look like this on the shelf. And it's blended whiskey that was created by a gentleman called William Sanderson, and it actually has a signature on the label of William Sanderson and Son. Now his son, he obviously spent a long time trying to figure out what he was going to name his son, was also called William. It was William Mark Sanderson. Now, William Sanderson the first, what am I on about? William Sanderson the first was born in Leith, which is here, and at the age of 13, got an apprenticeship with a wines and spirits producer. 13, I mean, what a start in life. I can't remember what I was doing when I was age 13, but where I am now, the thought of starting at 13, working for a wines and spirit producer, sounds like my ideal job. So as a result of his apprenticeship, he then moved into that business and was running his own business of wines and spirits production. And his son, William Mark, encouraged him to start blending his own whiskies. So in 1882, he blended 100 different casks of different types of whiskey, of various recipes, blends, malts and grains, all thrown together, 100 different casks, and then hired a panel of experts and friends to go through all the casks and tell him which was the best one in order for him to then be able to sell it onto the market. And you've probably guessed that number 69 was the one voted as the one to go for, hence VAT 69. So it was first bottled in port bottles, and the bottle shape actually stayed like that for about 100 years. You'll notice that the neck of the bottle, if I put another one up now, has kind of a bulbous neck, and it's almost a kind of USP of that particular bottle. And it's always found in green bottles as well, because those were port bottles at the time. Now, so 1882, VAT 69 was launched. In 1884, the company then bought the Glengarry distillery, which I've covered off as a single malt quite early on in the challenge. And the distillery itself was sited sort of in the middle of fields of barley. And they bought the distillery essentially to kind of guarantee that they were going to get stocks of grain in order to make the grain spirit to go into the blend. Now he actually also founded, along with two other whiskey producers whose names completely escape me, founded the North British Distillery, which is a grain whiskey distillery in Edinburgh, and is still going now. And again, that was to maintain the requirements of stock of grain whiskey to keep making VAT 69. He sourced malt whiskies also from Royal Lochnagar, which was owned by a guy called, I think it was John Begg. And when John Begg died, Sanderson actually became director of that distillery. Now in 1935, partly through the ownership of Royal Lochnagar, which by that time was William Sanderson Jr., and also sort of the businesses that they'd got, they ended up merging with Distillers Company Limited, which then became Diageo through various mergers and acquisitions. So VAT 69 is owned by Diageo as a brand. In terms of the makeup of it, in terms of the percentage of malt grain, not 100% certain, also not 100% malt, but it's, my guess is at about the 20-25. I don't think it's quite as high as some of the others that we've come across. Apparently VAT 69 was extremely popular with Richard Nixon, so make of that what you will. And apparently Ernest Shackleton also chose that as the whiskey to take him for medicinal purposes, shall we say, when he went to Antarctica. So it has fairly travelled. You're looking at about about £22 a bottle for this. Now VAT 69 is a bit of an odd one because my dad used to have a bottle of this, and I think it's the label, but as a kid it was VAT 69 and sheep dip were the two that when I saw it on a shelf, and when I did sheep dip, I think I talked about this, and this was way early on, I think it was number 6 in the challenge, when I talked about the label of sheep dip, and because it was called sheep dip, as a kid I had this impression of what it tasted like, which was literally sheep dip, what you think a sheep dip would taste like. And VAT 69, and I think it is literally just the label, and it's one of those labels a bit like Stewart's cream of the barley, where they've never really updated it, they've never modernized it, they've kind of kept it as traditional as possible. And I don't know why, but VAT 69 I've associated partly with Ouzo, because Ouzo has there's a brand of Ouzo that had like a similar printed label where it's like that typeface and that type of printing on it. So it's also like associated with Ouzo, and also I've associated with a whiskey just being rough as anything. Really cheap, really rough, almost undrinkable. I don't think I've had that 69. I honestly don't remember ever drinking it. So if I have, I can't remember it. So I'm going to say this is the first time I've ever had VAT 69. But I have these childhood memories of seeing this bottle on the shelf in my dad's whiskey cabinet and assuming it tastes rough as anything. So I'm not giving it a preconception, but there is a deep-seated kind of historical bit of me that's going, this isn't going to be any good. But the majority of me is going, let's give this a chance. So, and if it's got a chunk of Royal Nogar in, then that should be pretty good, because Royal Nogar was good whiskey. However, on the nose, not a great start. It has got, that I have referenced before, that slightly burnt plastic nose that I associate with cheap whiskey that uses colour, excessive colour. And it's not a hugely dark whiskey. Arguably the Chevec that I've just had previously was darker than this. But it's just something slightly off, slightly artificial, slightly plastic, slightly cheap. A little bit like, I tell you what it reminds me of, is when you buy Tupperware pots, like sandwich boxes, but cheap Tupperware pots, brand new off the shelf, in a store, something like B&M, Home Bargains, Poundland, something like that, and you've got these Tupperware pots that aren't official Tupperware, and you lift the lid off and take a sniff of it, and it's that kind of new, cheap, moulded plastic. It's that. It's not a great nose. It's not a pleasant nose at all. Ooh, this is borderline. This really is borderline. There's elements of that plastickiness on the palate as well, but at the same time, there's not a bad mouthfeel. It's quite rich, and there is a sweetness to it. This really is a whiskey of two halves, and it's on an absolute knife edge, because there's a graininess to it, but it's not a particularly pleasant graininess. It's not a juicy graininess that I quite like from grain whiskey. It's slightly harsh. And then there's a sweetness to it that's very much caramel, but it's not salted caramel, it's kind of toffee-ish. But it's just getting a little bit cloying. See, that went the other way. That didn't have the sweetness, that had the harshness. I've been pleasantly surprised by some of the whiskies that I've had, particularly blended Scotch. Was really surprised with Famous Grouse. Teachers was better than I thought it was going to be. Bell's was better than I thought it was going to be. I have had preconceptions about all of them that have been usurped. absolutely, really kind of pleasant, well balanced, not amazing, but actually a lot better than I thought. I've had preconceptions of VAT 69, even if they are far back in my childhood, and this is matching those preconceptions that I had. This is not a particularly pleasant whiskey. It's really unbalanced. There is a harshness to it. I can imagine it probably goes quite well in cocktails because it's got a kick that will cut through whatever else you're putting with it. But as a neat whiskey to drink, it's an odd combination of quite raw, it's not even metallic. It is still slightly plasticky graininess to it, and then a slightly sickly, cloying sweetness. And the two don't really, they don't even kind of bounce off each other in a pleasant way. They're just like that at loggerheads, and you either get one or the other, and neither of them are particularly pleasant. It's not a fantastic whiskey for me. Charlie did send me some notes about it, but I can't find them back. I can't find them on my iPod going back through the messages. I just can't go back far enough to the notes that he wrote. So I can't remember if he said that he liked this or not. But I want this to be better. I want this to overachieve what I thought it was going to do when I was a kid, looking at the label going, well, it's not a very nice label and it looks quite cheap and nasty, and it looked a bit like that Ouzo label that he also had that he never touched. But unfortunately, this has met those low expectations that I've got. It's just unbalanced. It's not really got anything to go, actually that bit's okay. The sweetness is a bit too sweet and a bit too cloying. The graininess is not juicy. It's a little bit rough around the edges. It's a little bit harsh. There's this plastic, new cheap Tupperware box sensation to it. Not great, unfortunately. It tastes like a cheap whiskey. Whereas the other whiskies that I've had, where I thought they were going to taste like a cheap whiskey, actually haven't. And this is one of the few blended whiskies that I've had so far that tastes like a cheap whiskey. Not many of them have. And some of the other cheap whiskies that I've had have just had nothing. So I've been able to turn around, and particularly with the Americans, where it was a case of there is just nothing there. There is nothing standing out about it. There is no flavour to it. It's just blur. This has flavour. It's just not particularly pleasant flavours. A disappointment, I'm afraid. So sorry, Charlie. I do apologise if you really, really like that. But I'd be interested to know what you think. But thank you anyway for sending it. And my father-in-law, my kid's grandfather, will probably appreciate that. So it won't get wasted. It's not going down the sink. Right, 2 blended whiskies left. That's all I have left. I can't actually remember what they are. William Lawson's and something. Anyway, go and check out the schedule, which is down on the bottom, and you'll see the list of the next few coming up. This tonight gets me a couple ahead of myself, so that when baby number 3 does turn up, at least I've got a little bit of a buffer in case things go a bit crazy, which I'm hoping they won't. I'm hoping it's going to be plain sailing all the way. Right, that's me done. I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.